So I'll start off with just telling you a little bit, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Dennis Shepherd. I've been coming along to this centre for a long time and been practising meditation and sort of trying to understand the Buddhist path for probably over 45 years or so now, so it's a long time. And it's always terrific to talk about Buddhism from my point of view, because it's a very in a way difficult religion to get across, because it's even the Buddha himself, when he first became enlightened, as they say, even he himself thought, gee, how am I going to be able to teach this? It's just so subtle. It's so subtle to see. But I think I get a feel for this a little bit more when I think about just the universe and what it is that we're doing here. I mean, I always sort of feel when I'm sort of thinking about this, and I do marriage ceremonies for the Buddhist Society here too, and I quite often bring this into the marriage ceremonies I do, because it's always a mystery to me how even people sort of meet and form relationships together. Great mystery on how they, how people, one person, but whenever someone picks someone, they certainly know that they're the right one, don't they, somehow? There's a mystery to all of our life here, and certainly a mystery to this universe. When you think about the universe and just this world, here we are on this planet. It's such an odd thing, isn't it? I mean, might be very normal for you coming along here in a bus and it all. We've done all this before, so we're used of it. But when you actually think of it, it's you think here we are on this planet, and there's a moon up there that kind of is somehow in relationship with us, and we're going around a sun, and the whole thing, we're kind of moving through space, and all of a sudden it does become a mystery, doesn't it? I love science. I love to follow all the latest science, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. But somehow I doubt that it's really ever going to explain the mystery of just what it is that we're doing here. So that's really much where I think the Buddhist religion is many religions are very good in the way that they approach this, but the Buddha did it in this particular way. And it sort of resonated with me when I first kind of got involved in Buddhism, and it does go to that point of looking at the mystery, just the mystery of what we're doing here. And the way, of course, we do that is through meditation. And I would like to have enough time to just do a little bit of meditation with you today so that you can get a feel for what that means. Because I would like to tell you just a little bit about the Buddha himself, because I think that's important to, just as an introductory to Buddhism to know about, because he certainly was just an ordinary person. He lived a long, long time ago now, though. It's 2,500 years ago, so well before Christ, and right back in a time in India when it was quite a very fervent mix around in the Indian subcontinent there, and just below Tibet where the Buddha lived. And he was a king. Well, his father was a king anyway. He was born into a royal family, so the Buddha was born with a lot of, might say he's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was certainly very powerful, wealthy family that he had, and he had the best that money could buy in those times. Summer palace, winter palace. He actually lived his life quite ordinary for the first 30 odd years or so, but there was somewhere I might just say that he even got married and had a child. We know all this from the record, and. But it was somewhere around about that time things started to fire up or ferment in his mind, and he decided that, just trying to work out what this all meant. And there's a story in Buddhism that sort of goes with the 4 heavenly messengers that I'll just quickly tell you about, because I think it's just important. It's just an interesting story to sort of allow us just to see what was in the Buddha's mind. But he was apparently outside the palace one day with an attendant, and he saw the first heavenly messenger, and that was just the first heavenly messenger was simply old age. I don't for a minute pretend that the Siddhartha Gautama, who was his name then, had never ever seen an old person. I'm sure that he did, but at some level though, he was ready to sort of see this is old age. I'm going to be old too soon. He's only a young man now, but I'm going to be old too. So kind of it hit in his mind, yeah, what's this about? I'm going to get old too, you know. And so, you know, it sort of really hit him. And then a little bit further on, he saw this sick person because, you know, with old age, it's generally, especially in those days, generally did go with a bit of illness. We didn't have the medicine that we had today then. So he saw this sick person, which is the second heavenly messenger. And the same thing happened, you know. If it says for the first time he saw sickness, you know, and again, I think that he probably had probably been sick himself, but it kind of struck him. What does this is really something special. And then going along a bit further, he saw a funeral pyre, which there was lots of, and so he must have seen this before too. But there was a family burying or burning, cremating their relative that had died. So death sort of stood up as a third heavenly messenger, sort of looked him right in the eye. You know, what does this mean? And then a little bit further on, he saw a mendicant monk. And there were lots of monks at that time, with all the Jains, and there was it was very religious. It was a religious time 2,500 years ago in India. So that really sort of set him on off balance when he saw all this, and it was shortly after that he left the palace, and he left his wife and his child, and he went and became a mendicant monk. And he travelled around everywhere. He learned all about meditation, and became very skilled at doing this very quickly. He was certainly a very fast learner, and sort of he was starting going through teachers. You know, when one teacher would teach him all that they could teach, you know, he went to the next until there was no teacher left, and he'd kind of gone as far as he could with the meditation as it was being taught at that time. And then he thought, well, what I might do is I might try. You know, he thought, I've lived in the extreme of opulence and pleasure that he got from the palace. He said, I might try to see what it's like by denying the body. And so he ventured onto this path where he just started to starve himself and thrash himself, thinking that, you know, maybe he'd make a breakthrough in his mind to be able to see what the truth of things really was by really punishing himself. And Siddhartha Gautama was a pretty good punisher. He really knew how to, you know, punish himself. And Andy will remember from the last time I was saying that up in Thailand they've got some of these statues. If you go into the Golden Palace there's these statues around the edge where you've got these images of the Buddha where he's just emaciated. You know, you can see that, you know, his stomach is right in, and actually it was said that the Buddha could put his hand in his stomach at that time and feel his backbone. So, you know, such that he's kind of mistreated himself so much and just eating rough leaves, and, you know, he's barely alive, basically. But then, after a time of this, he decided, I'm not going to do this anymore. Doesn't seem to be showing any results. He was just only dying. So he just come into his mind, he thought, what if I try the middle way? And the middle way, and this became really the name for Buddhism, the middle way. The middle way between extremes. So he decided that he'd take this woman come along and offered him some milk rice. So he ate the milk rice, and of course his friends that were with him had thought he'd gone weak and silly, really. So they left him, but he gradually over the coming weeks kind of built himself up a little bit more, until he got to the point where he thought, this is it, it's now or never. Thought that he had enough conditioning and enough experience around to be able to sort of make the breakthrough of what enlightenment was. So the story is that he sat under the bo tree in a town called Bodh Gaya in northern India. You can still visit it today. In fact, all these places you can still visit. It's quite a unique little pilgrimage tour around there, because it's not really all that commercial. You know, you can go to the mountains that he sat on and the places where all the arahats were and all these other people, where all the stories of the Buddha are. You can go and see these places today still. But anyway, he sat under the tree and he said, just made that affirmation to himself, I'm not going to get up now until I know what enlightenment is. And that night he became enlightened. He went into the various jhanas, and then he realised what enlightenment was. And that's where I was just saying before, that once he'd done this, you know, he was sitting in the bliss, just the bliss of enlightenment, the bliss of the peace that he'd found. And he just thought, God, how am I going to be able to teach this? It's just so subtle. How am I going to be able to do it? And then all the heavenly beings come down, all the goodness that's in the universe, you might say, came down and said, why not just go and teach those with a little dust in their eyes? And that's what he did. He first of all thought about these monks that he was with, and of course they'd sort of given him up. They thought that he'd caved in. So, but anyway, he had this clairvoyance that he could see. He could see that these monks were at Benares, a place called Benares, which is still there in India today. And he went and visited this park where they were, and he was walking up to them, and they were just, here comes that Siddhartha, the backslider, sort of a bit of back to it like that, and gradually he kind of came in, and they ended up making a seat for him, and he sat down, and from that point on he did the first teaching in Buddhism, which is the rolling of the Eightfold Path, the rolling of the wheel, the Dharma wheel of Buddhism, the Eightfold Path. And I think two of those monks from that very first instance became enlightened just from that talk. And then over the coming 40 years or so that he taught, there was many, many people and monks and nuns in that era that became enlightened. So this enlightenment is very, very difficult to talk about or just to point to, because it is quite subtle. But basically I can say this about it for you. It is really the uncovering of the present moment. So what we're saying here is that this present moment now, this right now, is really all that there is. This is the truth of existence. There's really nothing at all that we can think of from the past that is in any way kind of real or anything that we can hang on to, hang our hat on. We can sort of have memories, certainly. We can bring memories into the present moment, and we can reproduce those memories. But essentially, anything from the past is really like a corpse on your back, you might say, just to put it fairly bluntly. Anything you bring from the past is something that's dead and gone. It may be useful. We certainly have to use our experience in a wise way, but essentially this is the truth of reality. And the same for the future. You can think about the future, but there's really, because it hasn't come yet, it's not really anything that's real. I mean, to be honest, we don't even know if the sun's going to come up tomorrow, do we? We can't really say that for sure. It might be a fair bet that it will, but we don't really know. And that's the same with anything that you might think about in the future. It's got this, it's something we might speculate about or even bet on and try to make benefit from, which is all fair and okay, but there's no reality there in the future. The only place where there is reality is right here and now. So when we sit in meditation, what we're in fact doing is uncovering this moment. We're uncovering the moment, going deeper and deeper into the moment. And that's really essentially what the meditation is, and just what we try to do when we sit meditation, to understand where this enlightenment is. So unless there's any questions just up to that point, I think this might be a good time to stop and do some meditation, just so that you can too see what it's like to be in the present moment. Yes.
What do you mean by heavenly beings?
Yes. Heavenly. Well, heavenly. In Buddhist cosmology, there are many, many other planets, many beings, There's many ways that people can exist, or not. Well, say people, entities. That might be easier to say that. There's many realms of existence that can be thought about, or that we indeed can be born into.
Do you like terms like spirits and ghosts?
Yeah, well, there's spirits and ghosts too. I mean, it's not that sort of I'd encourage you to try and sort of get to see or be with the spirits and ghosts, but certainly in Buddhist cosmology, all that is quite possible. It's quite, and I'm certainly happy to sort of answer more questions about that. But probably it's good for the moment, though, for you to see what the meditation is. And unless there's any other questions, is there about the... Yeah?
Why do women fit into Buddhism?
That's a good question. Buddhism has had women as nuns right from the very beginning. Well, maybe it's probably wrong to say that exactly right from the very beginning, because the Buddha was reluctant, first of all, to ordain nuns. In 2,500 years ago, you can imagine the rights of women in terms of today was very, very different. Women were considered to be chattels, and they were really in the ownership of the male side of the. So it was a very unusual thing for him to do there, because there was not only that, in that culture there was also the caste system. So there was people that were, that you could be women and also be an untouchable woman, so there were sort of levels of caste. Now the Buddha kind of eschewed all of that. He didn't allow any of that really to. He never championed anything like that at all. I mean, he recognised the reality that was there, but he just said that all that was wrong, really, right from the start. And there was a particular monk called Ananda, who actually was really, he probably had a very feminine kind of a part to his makeup anyway. He actually encouraged the Buddha to set up an order of nuns. And the Buddha was reluctant to do it just because of the trials and tribulations that women would need to endure in doing it. But he did it. He set up an order of nuns, and there were in fact many, many nuns that became enlightened. There's a whole Buddhist treatise from enlightened nuns. So right from the start, nuns were in Buddhism, but it's true to say though too that over the years, about 500 or 600 years ago, and it could be because when a monk is ordained or when a nun is ordained, you've got to have 5 already ordained people, and this lineage is important in Buddhism. It goes right back to the Buddha. You've got to have 5 people to ordain. Now, what actually happened about 4 or 5, might be 600 years ago, the order of nuns sort of died out because there wasn't enough, it was just, and it's probably because of, that they weren't looked after by the men anyway. It was just, it would probably as a result of sexism, I would say. But what we've actually done here today, in our society here, because in the Theravadan tradition, this tradition that we belong to here, we've actually tried to reinstate that order of nuns, and we've got it with we ordained the first 4 Theravadan nuns here in this temple back in 5 or 6 years ago anyway. So we have a nuns monastery now with a thriving population of nuns. But in other traditions, the nuns have gone right through, and we actually use the other traditions to help us ordain the nuns and we are gradually reinstating the nuns into the Theravadan system. But they were there right from the very start. So I hope that's. I could say a lot more about that, but it probably gets sidetracked. Yeah.
Are there different stages of enlightenment? And what is it about if you reach the state of enlightenment are still alive, how that affects your day-to-day life, and something you've sort of read about holding on doing that because that will stop others. I can talk a little bit about that. What you're talking about with the last part, holding off so that you can help others, is more a Mahayanan tradition. So that comes from the Tibetan tradition. Can you just explain very briefly what the different types of Buddhism are? There's 2.
Yeah. Well, the main two are really Theravadan and Mahayanan. Theravadan is this tradition we've got here, which would probably be the most conservative of the Buddhism. Like all our monks and nuns use the same rules that the Buddha have. They follow the same Vinaya rules and the same, even though some of them might be a little bit outdated, but they're still all there. So Theravadan would be, as I say, probably the most conservative. Mahayanan, and there's a couple of offshoots of Mahayanan too, have cultural differences mainly. So when Buddhism went up through Tibet and then over to China and then back and down through Japan, it sort of changed. It became the Zen traditions, and it became, the Pure Land traditions in Japan, and these other.
Sorry, Taoism and Buddhism,
That's different, but Taoism, but it does sort of feed into, it like the same as Hinduism does a bit in Sri Lanka sometimes, but so you've got these traditions that. Is that enough on that? Because
I'm just wondering about the Enlightenment and the.
Yeah, no, that's right. I wanted to go on and talk about that rather than talk.
Yeah, no, that's okay for that. Yeah, okay.
So, because I'm aware that there's not too much time to.
It's really curious.
About 25 minutes left. With the Enlightenment,
this is really where the meditation is important, because you need to start to know your mind. When enlightenment is a part of the mind. The very first stanza that the Buddha wrote down in the Dhammapada was that mind is chief, mind is the forerunner of all things. So there's not one thing that you can't know, that you will ever know, or you'll never know anything else, but without in this world, without first knowing it in your mind. Your mind is, as Buddha says, the chief. And he goes on to say, like a cart following a horse, the mind leads, and then everything else follows. So everything really is about your mind. In meditation, we learn to understand the mind. You're kind of focusing in on the mind, and as I said before, uncovering the moment. So we're uncovering to get deeper and deeper and closer to the moment. There's an eightfold path that sort of explains this quite well. To do this properly, you need to have three things. There's three elements to this. You need, first of all, to have a reasonably developed morality. So in the Buddhist eightfold path, it is just right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So making sure that you've got a livelihood, that you're not exploiting people or things. Where you can watch your speech and just make sure that your actions have got a reasonable moral base. If you haven't got that kind of level, it's very difficult to sort of make your mind subtle enough to be able to sort of see these things that I'm going to talk about. So that's the morality side. Then there's a meditation, or there's a wisdom side that I should just say about first. The wisdom side of this is this right view. So moving and this is really what I'm trying to sort of show to you here today, just the right view, the right way to see the universe, the right way to see the world. And we only see this when we can start to get a perspective on ourselves, when we get a perspective on our mind. When we're locked up just in our day-to-day lives, sort of, just with our angers and our disappointments and our happiness and the joys and everything else that we do, we are essentially lost to what's happening. We kind of just, we're not really that much more, we're not using our faculties much more than what animals do. It's more an instinctual behaviour. And you can see that animals basically operate from that instinctual behaviour. But as human beings, we have this ability to reflect on ourselves. We can look back on ourselves and make sure that, and be able to notice what it is that we're doing, saying, seeing. I can reflect back on myself and say, oh, I feel like doing this, but then I can think to myself, but no, I'm not going to do that. Doesn't allow for that, does it? You just do the instinctual stuff. So we're understanding the mind, and when we understand the mind, we start to notice, various levels of the mind, and you can actually get back down to a point where you actually see just the pure consciousness that's there, the pure consciousness of the mind. And that's a very still place. So you can learn how to be still inside yourself, to be still so that you can got the stillness inside while you're living, and you can live your life quite happily, but you can know what this stillness is. And eventually you'll get to the point where you can see that stillness, the pure consciousness itself, disappear. So there's just to go to that point, there's three things that you can look at when you're looking at that. First of all, that everything, our lives basically, the Buddha said, is dukkha, or unsatisfactory. So that's the fact that we just get lost in ourselves. There's an unsatisfactoriness in that is not that doesn't bring you wisdom. The second thing is that everything in the universe is impermanent. There's nothing at all that you can think of really that is an impermanent thing. Except I can only remember one time when I went to a school once, and there was a young boy in grade 6. He was in grade 6, and he said to me, "I can think of a thing that's not impermanent." And he said to me, "The laws of impermanence are permanent." So I thought, well, I don't know if I could really not argue with that one. It was a very clever answer though anyway. But there isn't anything you can think of really that hasn't got this impermanence about it. And that's what brings about this dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness. Everything changes. And the third thing is that there is not self. So in Buddhism, it's an important point that you're raising here. In Buddhism, the fact that you cannot find even a kernel of anything that's me. There's not a Dennis that's inside me or an Andy that's inside Andy, according to Buddhism. It's more, there's a stream of consciousness there, but the Buddha said that is anatta. The Pali word for that, anatta means no self. So there is no self inside, really just a stream of consciousness. And when you look at it, in this way, it's hard to grasp that, because there is me. I know I'm me, but the meditation helps you get a perspective on what I'm saying there with that. I could go on a lot more with that too, but it's difficult to... So what say if we do some meditation before you do have to go? Because I would really like to experience just what this is. So what I'd like you to do first of all is make yourself comfortable. If you can, those on cushions, if you're not too sore already down there. Just cross your legs. It doesn't really matter. We won't sit for too long. And those on chairs, when you're sitting on your chair, just if you can, put your feet on the floor to ground yourself, and just move your back off the backrest so that you're supporting yourself and you've got that nice little curve in your back like that. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is just to close your eyes and just top of the head pointing to the ceiling. Just keep yourself nice and still. You can grab more cushions if you like. If you want to sit, there's plenty of cushions in those racks at the side. So top of the head pointing to the ceiling, eyes closed. And then just naturally just let your tongue rest against the palate of your mouth and close your mouth. And we'll usually just start off by anchoring yourself in the body. So just make a resolution to yourself that you're not going to allow yourself to go anywhere else except this meditation. Just making that firm resolution. This is meditation time for the next 10 minutes. And we're not going to go anywhere else except just stay inside this body and mind. And then when you're ready, when you're settled, just to put your attention on your toe. You can even maybe wiggle your toe if you need to feel it. And then just start to bring your attention up through your feet and your ankles, up through your legs, knees, thighs. And just feeling your bottom, how it's sitting on the seat. And up through your back, and if you can just get that nice energy in your back. One of the Eightfold Path is right energy. So just getting a nice energy so that you feel a bit like a marionette, like a puppet that's being pulled up, just with the strings pulling your head up, and just getting that nice flow of energy in between all the vertebrae of your back. So it's nicely balanced and comfortable. And feeling your arms just hanging by your side. And down to your hands and your fingers. You'll always feel plenty of sensation in your fingers. And this meditation is going to be a meditation on the breath. It's called Anapanasati. So just bringing your attention up into your head and just feeling any sensation that's around there and just relaxing as you go. And then I'd like you just to bring your attention onto the breath. And you can do this just at the tip of your nose if you like, or if you'd like you can do it from down in the stomach if you prefer to feel it there. But I'd like you just to put your attention on the breath, and you just need to know what the breath is doing, whether it's going in or whether it's going out. And I'd like you to do this without making a commentary on it. So you just, knowing means you just know, without a commentary. This is what we call bare awareness of the breath, just watching it come in and go out. And this is really all that I'm going to ask you to do, so that you just need to stay with the breath. But the most important thing is that as soon as you realise, as soon as you know that you've moved away from the breath, you realise that you're thinking about something else, or you've gone somewhere else, I'd like you just to cut through where you've gone to, just very firmly, but very gently just bring your attention back to the breath. And every time you realise that you've moved from your breath, I'd like you just to do that, just that simple exercise of just bringing your attention back. Very gently, but very firmly. Again, just staying with and keeping the attention on the breath. What we're doing here is looking at the last three factors of the Eightfold Path that I didn't mention before. Right now we're looking at right concentration and also right mindfulness and right energy. These are the factors of meditation. And these three factors will lead to the right way to see things, so the wisdom side of the Eightfold Path, which is right view and right intention. And then we use the moral side of the Eightfold Path, so right speech, right action and right livelihood. This whole process is what drives us to understand the present moment, uncovering the present moment. So just staying with the breath. And bringing the mind back. You can say bringing the mind home. So in a moment I'm going to ring the bell, and I'll just ring it 3 times. And during the resonance of the bell, it's always just a good idea just to do a bit of a stock take, just notice what happened. Notice what you did right, what you may think you can improve on next time. But just at the third ring, when the third resonance starts to fade away, you can just gently open your eyes. I know it was only a little taste. You were all very good too. It really was a shame to break into, to stop you there, because I could see that some of you were going quite well with it. Did anyone manage to get right through the whole session without their mind moving away from the breath? Anyone at all? Because out of everything that when we're teaching meditation, I think this is probably the most important thing to see, just to notice how the mind moves. It's moving all the time. And this meditation is really something that's quite different than what we would normally do as a human being. There's nothing wrong with the fact that your mind moves. In fact, the fact that our mind moves is probably a reason why we're on top of the food chain, because if our mind didn't move, we would have been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, many generations ago. So the fact that our mind does move is, that's symptomatic of what it is to be a human being. But the important point here, though, is to notice how that also takes us away from this reality of the moment, to start to understand the truth that's there in that statement, and to start to bring that present moment more into your life, because it is possible to be aware of the present moment while you're living your life. And when you live your life with the present moment there, you'll find that your life is lived in a much more sensitive way. You become very sensitive as a person, because you start eventually to know what other people are thinking. You start to know what the planet's thinking, what the planet needs. Now, this meditation is a very important thing for us all, I think, to become involved in, to become more sensitive to each other, so that we don't sort of create wars. And when you think of all the wars and all the trouble that is in the world, you know, most of it's really on a very juvenile level, isn't it? It's almost kindergarten politics, most of wars and everything like that happens. And it basically is because people aren't aware of the reality of what it is that we're involved in here, the reality of the truth of the present moment. So it's a very powerful thing to practice. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, I'm certainly not saying this in a way to try and convert you all to Buddhists. That Buddhism is not a proselytising religion at all. You know, this meditation stands by itself, I think, in many forums, in many religions. In fact, it's wonderful, I think, to see that some of the Christian traditions taking this over, and some of the other traditions, to learn what meditation is. But sort of bringing your mind right into this present moment is a wonderful thing. And you can be aware of the present moment when you're acting to do things, so that it almost becomes like, you know, if I'm sort of, when I'm speaking to you now, as I am, aware of the resonance of my consciousness behind me. It's not Dennis that's speaking to you. It's kind of like a universal response to the moment, to what's happening. And it's possible for us all to do that. And then in that way we'll make wise decisions and wise choices. And we'll be starting to practice, you know, on the road to this enlightenment that the Buddha saw. It is a very subtle thing, enlightenment, but it's possible for all human beings to do it. Many, many human beings over the years have achieved and understood what this enlightenment is. And it's certainly possible for every one of us in this room. So I know it's getting towards time now, so if there are any more questions, I'd certainly be very... Yes, yeah.
What's the Buddhist view on how he's supposed to create? Is it creationist or is it evolutionist?
Oh, it'd certainly be evolutionist. I mean, there's nothing at all that I can see. In fact, I kind of read and love popular science all the way. Quantum mechanics, I think, is just a wonderful subject. I guess you do quantum mechanics at school, do you? You know, well, it's a very weird thing. Quantum mechanics is weirder than anything that I've sort of seen in Buddhism. On my own blog, I've just written a little blog of my own on consciousness, subconsciousness, and the double slit. You know, the double slit experiment. That's all this is just very compatible with Buddhism and the present moment. I mean, because there's nothing that I've ever seen. In fact, I think that probably scientists would be well served to actually become Buddhists and actually learn the meditation, because I think that probably understanding the physical nature of the universe would be very helpful for them, and it might sort of get them further, into where they're trying to get to with looking at a unified theory of the universe. So yeah, Buddhism is very compatible with science. And the evolutionary theory, it sort of would appear that that's a reasonably good explanation of how we got to how it is. Just on that, because the Buddha, we just think of this man 2,500 years ago. You could imagine, what was he thinking about? What was he doing? He actually, when somebody asked him, "Tell us, Lord," they said, "Tell us what the first condition, what was the first thing that happened? What started all this off? And it's a good question, isn't it? What started all this off?" And the Buddha said, this time he said, "I have looked back over 24 kalpas. Now, I'm just going to stop there and just tell you what a kalpa is. A kalpa in Buddhist terms is a universal cycle. So at the moment we think the universe is somewhere around about 14 billion years, don't we? So if proton decay ends up being the right thing for the universe to fade out with, well, maybe it'll go to 60 billion, 80 billion. But a universal cycle is what the Buddha was referring to. I mean, he wouldn't have known about protons and he wouldn't have known about the science that we know about now. But nonetheless, in his mind, astronomically thinking, he was actually seeing that cycle of the universe, that enormous length of time. And what he actually said about a kalpa, he said a kalpa is a length of time such that if you got the finest silk from Benares and you drag that silk just once every 100 years across the Himalayan mountains, by the time those mountains were worn to the ground is the time for a kalpa. So, you know, it's staggering actually when you think about that. This man had the ability to see that deep time in his mind. And then on the other hand, he actually was talking about a moment of consciousnness. And he said that, he called these little, because he was talking about them as like little corpuscles, like little particles of consciousness. And he said these particles of consciousness, and he called them kalpas, the name of them were kalpas. He said they come together and they fall apart trillions of times in the wink of an eye. Just imagine that. So he sort of had the whole, he could see right through astronomical time, but he could also see right into quantum time, right down past Planck's constant, you know, right back into the very smallest measure of what time is. I mean, he wouldn't have known what Planck's constant was, of course, but nonetheless, it was a pretty good thing he said. I was pretty cool, I reckon. Anyway, I can see that Andy's getting restless over his.
If everybody could just give a little clap for Dennis for...
Oh.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and all of this with us. And I know if you guys participated in that, feeling quite relaxed. So that's nice.
Yeah.
If you guys will put your shoes on and walk nice.
And thank you all for coming.